Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 277, Structured Classrooms Are Safer, with Kevin Lackie. An important distinction for teachers. We want our students to view our class as safe, free, open, not authoritarian, all of those things. But in order to do this, there must be an operating system, an OS, running in the background. A clearly defined structure, procedures, and yes, rules. In this conversation, Kevin Lackie joins me to discuss the importance of classroom management and structure in choral education. This also is the topic of a recent Choral Journal article that Kevin wrote. ACDA members, be sure to check that out. He emphasizes the need for teachers to create an inclusive environment where students feel expected and engaged. And he's going to explain what students feeling expected looks like later in this episode. Many useful portions of this episode center around the ways that unified educational philosophies can be adapted to a variety of teaching realities. For example, do you teach on block? Or do you teach, like me, a shorter period every day? Chances are our tactics could be different, but the philosophy is the same. Kevin shares his journey in music education, highlighting the significance of warm-ups as the source of his concepts to be used later in the rehearsal, and the role of his philosophy in his teaching. The discussion also covers strategies for redirecting student behavior and building buy-in among students, ultimately aiming to foster a cohesive and productive learning environment that feels free, but is a freedom that comes from classroom management structure that we learn as teachers as a core skill. Choir directors, music educators, show planners, you pour your heart into your music. Shouldn't your events get the same attention? That's where Ludus comes in. Sell tickets, promote your concerts, and fundraise with ease. Selling merchandise and concessions? Ludus Retail makes in-person sales effortless. Running choir camps or workshops? They have a classes feature that keeps registration simple, and when you need help, the live support team is ready to pop up with real answers from real people. The best part? It's completely free for organizations. Thousands of music programs already trust Ludus because great music deserves more than just a ticketing system. Ensemble trips can be more than just a performance. They can build community, inspire artistry, and give students a reason to stay invested. That's why I recommend Kaleidoscope Adventures. For more than 30 years, Kaleidoscope has helped student groups travel with purpose, combining performance opportunities with experiences that deepen musical understanding and create lifelong memories. They'll help you find the right destination, the right venue, and the right balance of music, education, and fun. And they manage the planning from start to finish so you can focus on your job as an educator. To explore options for your choir, visit mykatrip.com or find the link in the show notes. Big shout out goes to the producers and Inner Circle over at the Patreon page. These are folks that are really dedicated to keeping the lights on here at this show. Venture Studios, Chandler Smith, Brian Long, Michael Herron, Kyle Peterson, Steve and Kathy Kakachik, David Kowalczyk, Max Jackson, Angie Schilling, Rebecca Chalk, RJ McCracken, Michael Shimp, and Kyle Siddons. All right, everybody, I'm here with Kevin Lackie, and Kevin is here to discuss, I think, an important topic, but maybe an under-discussed topic in a lot of sessions. And if you go to, for example, if you go to a choral convention, you're probably going to see a lot of stuff about teaching the music part, which is good, maybe less about how do we set up our classrooms with a structure that allows this learning to take place. And Kevin recently wrote an article about this very topic in the Choral Journal and is here to discuss it with us today. So Kevin, welcome.
Hey, thank you very much. And I agree. I think it's something that we can all talk a little bit more about and help out a bunch of people along the way.
Yeah. Now, of course, recently on this show, I did a First Days of Choir series, and It was based on Harry Wong's book, The First Days of School, which is very classroom management, set up your class from the very beginning of the school year focused. And Harry Wong, even all those decades ago, made this same argument, I think, in a lot of ways that you are, which is that we could look at a very highly structured choral classroom or classroom in general and just say, well, that's just a teacher being strict.
Yeah.
But then what a lot of people don't realize is that kids actually need that safety structure in order to feel like they can explore within almost like a playpen, but you got to have walls on the playpen or else chaos happens. So I think that's kind of where we're starting, but we're going to save that for just a little bit. First, tell everyone about you. Who are you? Where do you come from? Where do you do what you do? All those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up outside of Boston in the North Shore area. I think my story is kind of rather unremarkable in a way that I tell people when I talk about this, I'm not one of those people that went and scoured the countryside for all the greatest resources. I just started doing the job and had to learn along the way. And like so many people, just kind of struggled and then overcame. I grew up here outside of Boston and did choir in middle school and actually dropped out. And then when I was in high school, I had an extra credit and my mom was like, why don't you join chorus again? You had a good voice. And for some reason, I decided to do it. So I was involved in chorus all throughout high school, but I also did all the other things. I was in sports and whatnot. I wasn't that great, but chorus was just kind of something I did. And then when it's time to go to college, my high school teacher was the one that really gave me the push and supported me along the way. So I got my master's in music ed at Keene State College in New Hampshire. Had a really great time, a lot of learning curves along the way. And I realized the more I knew, the more I learned, the less I knew. So I really wanted to go for a master's instantly. And we moved to my then girlfriend, now wife, and I. We actually moved to North Carolina for East Carolina University, where a colleague of both of ours, Dr. Jamie Rhodes, was my first conductor that I TA'd for. And I did my pedagogy sequence with her. And that was one of the greatest influences still on my conducting. And it's something I took all the way through with me. I'm really thankful I got to experience her, even though she wasn't the primary reason I was there. And then my wife then was looking at changing her career as well. So we went to DC and that's where we ended up landing and that became our home. And I was just looking for a job. So I just applied and kind of did the cold call thing. And I was really fortunate enough to get a middle school job in Fairfax County. I didn't know anything about anything. I was just trying to get hired. And that's kind of where things began for me. And the school that I ended up working in had a lot of different challenges. At a time, it was Title I. It's a military base is within its parameters too. So we were a significant military presence school, and we earned a Purple Heart designation. And then also, there was over 50% of the student population was learning English not as their first language. So we had all these different things that were kind of going on. When I was hired, there were 44 kids in our choral program, and I didn't know what that really meant. And throughout the year, me trying all the things that I did, I was really proud. My second year, I started with 126 kids in my choral program over the growth of that first year. And it was incredible. And I really got to do a lot of things with them. And then when COVID hit, I ended up actually absorbing the high school. So I was in 2 separate buildings and that was a lot of fun, but it was pretty taxing. And then in the end, I just was in a high school and I had a really great time, but I knew I wanted to go and get my doctorate. That's always something I wanted. So I am now at Boston University, getting my degree in conducting there with Dr. Daniel Parsley, having a really great time. I work primarily with the symphonic chorus under him, which is fantastic. It's something that I am really passionate about. And then I'm also I'm on the teaching staff at Harvard, and I work with the Harvard courses and the Harvard Glee Club with Andy Clark, which is a ton of fun. And other than that, I'm the tenor-based repertoire resource chair. And I'm still in Virginia. I'll be finishing out my time there and still miss my home family back outside in DC.
That's amazing. That's awesome. There's a parallel there, too. Our couple years teaching sound very similar. I started at a program with a handful of kids, and year 2 almost tripled the numbers in pretty exciting ways. That's always an exciting way to start your life. And can be inspirational. Now, I'm curious, before we dig into the meat here, why write a article about classroom management? What was the spark for that topic for you to write on? Yeah,
actually. So as I progressed in time, there's kind of this amorphous, you become a quote unquote veteran teacher after X number of years in our area. And I think it's a relatively low number. It's only a couple of years before you're a veteran. Mm-hmm. I made a great connection with a guy. His name is Luke Frells, and he is they're called the choral resource teacher, and he actually supports all the choral teachers in the county because there's something like 200 schools or something like that. Huge. And he and I really made a connection with our philosophies. So he brought me on to work on choral curriculum. So I became on the curriculum team, and then that ended up rolling into doing my first in-service training. And he brought me on for classroom management because he said, hey, I'm looking around. There's a lot of people that need a bit of help. Could you talk about what you do? And I did a bit of my first day, kind of couple of things. And then that is what kicked off me writing this article. I realized that I have just these experiences and beliefs, and they've been successful. And I believe that there's a lot of people that could be helped with them because I struggled so far along the way. So hoping to help others along the way too.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. So let's dig in here. And so if we're kind of framing a problem to solve, which
Sure.
is that for many, especially new, but I would even say a lot of veteran teachers, if they don't quit, are struggling at oftentimes with rowdy, distracted, unproductive choral classrooms in ways that might be different than our math or English or science colleagues around the building, partly because our area is an elective. So we have
Yeah.
to first convince them that to care in the first place about the academic rigor, but then also it's just a different structure. They're not sitting at desks oftentimes. They're not cordoned off in their own little areas doing their own thing. It's always group work. And so that we create a social environment for kids, which a choir is a social environment. But then we also
Yes.
have to teach school. And so there's this dichotomy that happens there. And so I'm setting up the frame here for you to fill in some of your thoughts, and then we'll go from there. That teacher preparation programs is one of the points, some of the points that you made in your article, oftentimes underemphasize the classroom management part as if it is a core skill, like a thing that we must get good at in the same way that we must get good at singing, or we must
Yeah.
get good at reading music, or whatever it is. But setting up these classroom management skills are a core issue and really can't be done well without a cohesive philosophy about that.
Yeah.
So I'll kick it over to you as like, how do you think about this and this about this part of the question?
Yeah, and actually to your point too, I think a lot of times it's not even fully addressed at all. For me, it wasn't something that was ever on the forefront of my mind at all throughout my multiple degree programs. It was almost as if this will be set up for you was kind of the thing. So for me, really, I was starting from ground zero and just kind of experimenting with the whole thing. So one of the things that I think about first and foremost is that it's my job to make sure every person feels expected. And it's one of those first impression things. And I tell people, if you make a reservation at a restaurant and then you show up and then they make you wait, it's frustrating. And if it's in a group, it could also be embarrassing. Like, I did my job, I got my reservation right. So for me, it's starting with, as everyone comes in the room, no matter where they are in the year, they always know that I'm ready for them. I've thought about them. There's a place for them. So instantly they feel like they're part of something. And they know they're also being looked out for. So if there are students that come in with a bit of that history that, they're looking to be cared for, they get that instantly. On the other end, if you're a student who is maybe a little bit on the rowdier side and you're coming in, from as soon as you approach the door that I've already thought about you. And in terms of your rowdiness too. So I think it's a great equalizer of ensuring that everybody knows that when they're in the room, they're part of the experience, and I have already thought about them. So it could be share. I'm a big advocate for setting up the physical space. I'm very much that kind of person. I will sit in every chair to make them and think about what is the student perspective, so that way I very much get into my environment, because that's what I think really influences the students a whole lot, is what environment they're in.
Right. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's real. I'm definitely in that camp as well. I rehearse with risers. We don't have chairs
Okay.
in my classroom, and so the classroom's just already set up. But I don't ever start class without a standing chart of some kind, because I want you to, not only do I want there to be order in a chaotic environment already, but I also want that, for a lot of the philosophy is very similar to what you just stated, which is I want every kid to feel like they are important enough that I thought about where they should stand in order to
Yeah.
be a part of the choir. Knowing the one thing you said about when a kid comes to the class for the first time, you show evidence that you knew they were coming and you were ready for them and all that. I
Yeah.
would like to make sure that sometimes that the front office staff in my building knows this, because this, like that, sometimes it's really frustrating when a student will show up in my class and no one told me they were coming. Like
Oh,
a
yeah.
new
Yep.
a new student, like, oh, I'm super glad you're here, but then there's a deer in the headlights. They can see it. The kid knows I had no idea you were coming.
Oh, yeah.
And that actually has happened to me 5 times this school year already, and it's really
Really?
frustrating for the same reason that you just said, which is I don't want that to be their first experience in my
Yeah.
class. I want to know their name already. Like,
Hmm.
oh, I'm so glad you're here. What school did you come from? Like, what was choir like at your place? And like, they
Yep.
know that they're coming. So that's a really important one. And I also wonder too, what you think about the philosophy of classroom setup for the activity that you're getting ready to do. Are you set up your classroom differently throughout the year and there's always something different happening, or are you very much like this is how the room is set up and we always do it that way, or
Yeah,
both?
yeah, yeah. So I'll kind of go back and just give a little bit of a trick to the point you said about the students coming in without being told. So
Mm-hmm.
when I was at my first school and we had a military base in our proximity, I mean, it was 20 to 30 times a year, someone would walk in your room and you wouldn't know. So what I actually started to do was I made extra folders and I kept them right beside me and they were
Mm.
always ready to go. So if a student walked in my door, I didn't get it right at first, but when I was really going, I would just kind of put on my showman face, be like, "Oh my gosh, so glad you're here. Here's your folder." And then I would say, "Could you just, remind me of how to spell your name?" And then I would kind of just have like almost like a little bit because I never wanted them to know that they were ever an inconvenience. And I would have additional chairs on the wings so that way it always felt like for me it was my workaround to make sure that even if I was not able to be prepared, I had a plan B so the student never knew. And then I would go to the admin and I was like, "What happened?" So even if people struggle with those challenges, because they're very real, is having a plan in case if the things don't go right. Maybe that helps someone out there. Your other question about the room, yeah. So I kind of have like a general framework that everyone would have of where the chairs are. And every room that I've always had chairs just on a floor. So I've had complete flexibility to do whatever I wanted. So I would establish certain like room setting A, room setting B, room setting C. The kids wouldn't know it, but in my head, I would have a bit of like, this is what it looks like when I do this. This is what it looks like when I do that. So that way I would come in the morning and then instantly start moving chairs around. And just so that way, when the students came in, the chairs were already there. And then I would have on the board and signs and about like where they should go. So that way, when they came in, they were met with directions if there ever was a change.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so here's a question then, still related to this part of the conversation that
Yeah.
every audience member should also consider this question. You can kind of answer out loud in your car, and then I want to hear your thought too. So, do we do this? Do we have a cohesive classroom management strategy and systems in place before the school year starts? Do we do it so that we can make good music, or do we do it for some other reason, some higher order reason? Because it's just like this is being a good teacher 101 and all teachers should do this. How do you think of that question?
That's definitely changed over time. I think when I was first starting out as a teacher, I was very much in the camp of I'm making the best musicians I can and the greatest music I can. And I was just so almost hyper focused on the musical element. And this is not an advocating for not keeping music as a high priority because it absolutely is. But in my mind, I started to realize I was not, you have students that are in your program and then they go all over, right? They go to college, they go into the workforce, they move, they stick around, right? All these things. So then I realized I can use my room as a vehicle for just instilling values and helping to help them grow as people. And I would rope those into conversations with parents too, so that they understood that music is our thing that we're doing and it's important to us and it's meaningful. It has a place in the world, but also they can go through this program, come out on the other side as a more complete human, even though we're never fully complete, but just a little bit more complete version. So yeah, but that's something that came actually a bit later on in my time. I think I was still trying to grapple with, accomplishing things and this and that. And then actually what I found is, and I'm sure you agree, once I took the pressure off of the musical element, reaching that certain bar, it then allowed me to to relax. And then we achieved more, right? Kind of just when I reprioritized just a little bit, we were so much more successful, so much more cohesive as a group too. And yeah, so that's kind of what I think about that.
Yeah. Whether you've newly discovered the show or you're a longtime listener, I would like to encourage you to become a paid subscriber, either on Patreon or Substack. Each works as a way for you to financially support this show and has different pros and cons, but in both subscription locations, you'll have access to my Google Drive, behind the scenes episodes, a direct line of communication to me that I will prioritize, and more importantly, it makes sure that I can keep doing this show forever. Those supporters are the reason that I'm able to do this show as a job and sustain it and treat it like a content generation machine for your benefit. So I would encourage you to head over there to either patreon.com/choralosophy or choralosophy.substack.com and become a paid subscriber today. The details of my grading and classroom management philosophies are on the show already. There are episodes about it where I do a deep dive, so I won't really do that here. But I like how you said taking the pressure off, because what that's done for me is that I feel like my mindset on this topic shifted as well, very similarly to how yours described. I am no longer chasing the dragon, so to speak, related to, not a drug reference, no longer chasing the dragon of the final group product. What the dragon I'm chasing is individual students' skill-based growth over time. Yeah. And then the magic happy accident of that is, as kids are getting much, much better on an individual basis, then the group product just is better, or will be better, because every individual singer is becoming better. And so if the strategies for me are kind of all based around that. Now, okay, kind of moving to the next point here, as we've discussed, effective classroom management is going to start with like a philosophical clarity of what it is that you're trying to do. Right. And that structural changes, the things that you try to do. So if somebody listens to this episode or goes back and listens to my grading episodes, they can do all the things. In fact, they could do everything the way I described it, or everything the way you described it in the article, but without an understanding of why they're doing it and what the motivating goal is. In a lot of cases, it will fall short because it won't be sustainable. Thoughts about that? Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's why when I originally conceived what I was trying to convey, I actually had these two categories, almost like the philosophies came first, and then it was the process. Because I think if you put the process first and then try to rope in the philosophies, it's going to be out of balance, but also it's going to be, you're going to be tinkering with the tasks, and then you're kind of, what is it? You can't see the forest through the trees kind of a thing. So for me, putting the philosophies first has made the process easier or better to understand. So like the students being expected, that's a different thought than just like establishing my classroom and having every kid in a seat, right? Those are different things. Having every kid in a seat, that's a checkbox. But making sure everyone feels they're expected, that's a philosophical choice. It's a value choice. And I would argue if you have that perspective rather than just butts and seats, you're going to have a better outcome. The students are going to have a better outcome, right? So yeah, so the philosophies are so important. And there's something you said in the beginning about structure. And I tried to allude to it in my article a little bit, which is when I first started, I was right out of college. And so I wanted to be this is choir. This isn't your other class. Like, I'm not a regular teacher. I'm a cool teacher, right? We all try to do that whole thing. And that's kind of where I then found later on, the students, they crave the structure. They really want it. And that can be tough to grasp if you're I think especially if you're younger, and I say it only because I know it was for me. That was not something I came in with, having the idea that structure is so important, and they want the structure. They absolutely want it. They'll never tell you, but deep down inside, they know they want it. But they also don't want it to feel like the other classes. Just like you said, there needs to be a different kind of flavor to what the class is like. But for me, the structure, it comes down to allowing students to establish on their own without an adult if they are right and wrong. They should be able to do those inner check-ins, and if you can pull that off, and if you can pull that off, that's what it's all about. And I think that's the biggest victory of the whole thing. When I said earlier about trying to make a more complete adult, right? A more complete human being, if they can establish for themselves right or wrong on their own, then that's a victory. And think of all the things that would pay off because of that in the choral classroom, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I have an example of one of the things that might be what you mean by kind of being philosophically centered, and that the processes might be secondary to that, might be downstream to those things, and see if this is fair for what you are, how you think about it. So, for example, one of my core philosophies as an educator is that instructional time, instructional minutes are precious and we need to use them very, very efficiently. And that is not to say that there can't ever be downtime, but the downtime is also strategic. It's also
Yeah.
part of like working us towards a goal. But the structure that I use to maximize that time may or may not work from one teacher to the next, or it might not even work for me if I retire and go from Missouri and go teach somewhere else in another place. And I've got different numbers of classroom minutes, and I've got a different recruiting system, and I've got a different feeder system, and all of a sudden I'm in this different context. I might have to change my tactic, but keep my philosophy, right? So,
Yeah.
for example, I start with as soon as the bell rings, we are singing. So like that happened. That's the tactic that I use. But the philosophy that caused me to choose that tactic is that rehearsal time is crucial, and we need to use every single bit of it. Now, the reason I choose that tactic is because my largest class sometimes is 90 to 100 kids,
Yeah.
and if I don't establish in advance when they come into my program what efficient moving through the room and getting ready and organized and all that kind of stuff. Even with 10% of the kids not doing what they're supposed to do in a class of 100, that's chaos.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so it looks like very strict, regimented behavior, but it all comes back to a philosophy. Am I on to something there? Is kind of how you're thinking of it too?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you have your philosophy that really works for you, and you're right. You can transfer it. I think what'll be interesting for us to talk about is I think you have 50-minute periods. Is that what you said? 55?
44 now. I used to have
44.
54. I used to have
Okay.
54 for most of my career. Now it's 44.
We were on middle school and high school block schedule. So I had 96 minutes of middle schoolers or high schoolers, whatever it was. So therefore, I could not necessarily do the same thing that you could. I couldn't go through 44 minutes uninterrupted. Like I really had to think about what, like you said, I thought of it as like intentional downtime, right? I was thinking about, how am I handling my breaks? Because I can't drill them for 96 minutes, not at this age, not
Right.
effectively, or not every day. There are some days where we'll come in and it's, they can just feel in the room, it's about to be a day, right? But I had to think about those breaks and how I would, and I chose to do lots of intentional conversations. That's kind of how we managed it so they could rest their voices. But we still had the philosophy first, right? It wasn't just burning time. And I think even if someone who was not in the room, like an administrator, came into the room, they could tell something was going on, even when it wasn't, drilling and not minutes of instruction time. They could still feel there's some intentionality there. So yeah, you're right. You have to start with the philosophy and think about what's important to you. What do you want your students to come out with? If it's what musical things, what non-musical things, right? Those are all super important.
Yeah. Now, yeah, that's exactly right, and I totally agree. And I think it's an interesting thing because Cindy Ellis was on the show a while back, and she has 90-minute
Yeah.
class periods, and she starts every class period with dictation. So that looks very different than how my class starts, but I would say that the philosophy is the same. She's spreading out, putting in different portions of her longer rehearsal. They're doing different types of things. And of course, I'm super jealous because I wish I had that kind of time with kids. But I would still start with something. So I have my first 2 years teaching were also on blocks. I think we were 88 minutes or something like that.
Okay.
Very similar kind of a situation. It was 4 classes one day, 4 classes another. So an 8-period block. Same thing there. I didn't feel the pressure to get the singing and the warm-up started right away and go all the way to the bell with no downtime. Now that for me has created very important pedagogical processes that have allowed me to get enough information loaded into a class. And so this kind of brings up another part of the classroom management thing, and I want your take on it, especially since I'm a shorter class rehearsal and you're a longer one. I've always believed that the number one of all strategies for good classroom management is avoiding downtime. But what I mean by downtime is unstructured time, because when kids don't have anything to do, they do jack around. If we don't give them a meaningful task that they can engage in, they will engage in each other's. If they're boys, they'll grab each other's sides or pull each other's pants down or whatever. If we don't give them that. So what are your thoughts about that concept of so in a longer rehearsal, do you find that it's similar in the sense that you've got to structure still all those minutes, even though there's more of them?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because I'm not completely a minute to minute kind of person. And for me, I'm definitely quality over quantity. If I get what if the music gets what it needs in X amount of time, that's okay to me if it took XY amount of time, right? So it changed how I thought about my classes. So for me, I would say I was focused a lot on how everybody was doing as a person. This is also a little bit influenced by my wife is a therapist. I have a bit of this we have an interesting perspective in terms of how I interact with kids. So I actually started every single day, I asked everyone how they were doing. And I was always taking mental notes of who's speaking up, who wasn't speaking up. And I would very much make sure I would get around that within one day. But I was always making sure that they had an adult in their life that was asking them how they were doing. And that meant a lot to me, which is not musically related. It's not even necessarily teacher related, but I just knew my population of students that I had in all three of my schools that I was in, that I wanted to just make sure that they knew there was an adult in their life that was asking how they were doing and would listen to what the answer was, right?
Right.
So that's a complete divergence from what you were talking about, right? Because you're talking about the minutes. So, but then,
Well, yes, but I don't consider that downtime.
sure, of course,
That to me is still structured time.
that's true. Yeah, that's very true. Very true. Yeah. And so what I would then do, right, if we're talking about structured downtime, et cetera, is how we transition them out of it into the active things. So I would teach my kids how we get between activities, right? Like a very social downtime where we're all talking with each other. Maybe there's a story or a joke or whatever it ends up being. I was then getting everyone very, very quickly into music making or into doing sight reading or this and that. So even for me, when I was thinking about how am I going to, structure my classroom, how am I going to handle downtime, how am I going to handle conversations or not, I then also was thinking, how do I get out of this? How do I get out of it quickly? And also, what if we get ourselves into like a sticky, awkward conversation? I need to move this quickly. So I would teach my classes how to move, right? Yeah. And I think that's another trick. I didn't talk about that in my article, but we're just talking about it now, which is if you are going to think about all these different components, the other component is the classroom management strategy of getting them from A to B to C, because that sometimes can be really, really tough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's important. Yeah, I agree totally. All right, let's talk about concepts related to proximity to the students and redirection and how we can think through those things. Now, of course, a good disclaimer to start this is that we recognize that, I'm sure you agree, that everybody's classroom is set up very differently, and there are limitations sometimes that we obviously can't control as teachers, because I've even seen some choir teachers that have a giant beam running through the middle of their room for structural support of the room, and they can't even see from their piano to all the kids. They have to teach around a pole, basically. So just there are super frustrating layouts, I'm sure, in different people's rooms.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, the proximity thing, I'm glad you mentioned it in the article, because when I switched from chairs, the way my room is set up, when I switched from chairs to risers every day, the proximity problem just was solved, because everybody's face is within a certain number of square feet of each other, and I can walk around the room and get real close to the basses or real close, or I can walk up into the tenor section and right back down, and it's just easy to get in and out. But when I had 100 chairs, the distance between me and the back chair was, first of all, really far away, and second of all, unsurmountable. I couldn't get back there in time in a reasonable amount of floating around the room, etc. So this one has spoke to me, because this has been a huge part of my career. So why did you include the concept of proximity in our discussion?
Yeah, so actually I'll kind of want to take it out, just widen the lens a little bit more. For all the things that I talked about in there, I actually was coming at it from a preserving dignity kind of lens, right? So I was thinking of doing classroom management in a way that makes sure students feel dignified, right? We are all humans. We are all going to go off track. We will. And, the degrees to which we go off track and what we do when we're off track, right? There's a difference, but we all will. We're all going to lose it. So I wanted to make sure that when I was talking about it and thinking about it with my students, that I was correcting a behavior, not a student, if that makes sense, Mm-hmm. And I say this because I think it's not a big stretch of the imagination. You may know or come across people that make it personal and not about the behavior. I have an example that came to my head when, where the choir's kind of doing their thing and, things are kind of, someone's starting to kind of go off the rails, and the director, I don't think it was said maliciously, but would just start saying like, "Don't be lazy, don't be lazy," and I was like, "Oh, whoa, that feels personal, right?" As opposed to, all the other X factors that could kind of go into this. So when it comes into proximity, the first thing that I think about is just how am I going to correct the behavior, preserve some dignity, and if I need to, rope back later, I can. But I need this thing to stop right here and right now. So that's why when I think about proximity, I actually had the opposite experience from you, because you said when you went to risers, you enjoyed it. I always was a little bit more on edge when we went and moved to risers, because then it was almost like there was a wall in front of me, and it was the opposite. When we're in chairs in the classroom, I could weave in and out. I could do exactly what I needed to. I could get exactly where I needed to be. I could, if we're doing whatever, I could give a direction and then snake around to whoever I need to get to and correct a behavior if that's what I needed to do. But once we're on the risers, for me, that was a bigger challenge. Interesting that you and I are different on this, right? You enjoyed it. I was always a little bit on edge when I came to that moment.
Yeah.
But for me, the
I
direction
wonder if that's also structural though, because
Sure.
because I wonder, like for example, like what is your biggest choir size
My biggest
of
when
students?
yeah, we would, I think the largest when I had the middle school was somewhere around like 60 in a class.
Yeah. So I know, but based on the way my classroom was set up, chairs also take up more space. Like they take up
Yeah.
more physical space. And so for me, that move was a lifesaver because of how much space of the travel
Right.
it cut down. Like I just didn't have to walk as far. And we have 12 if we need them. Most days I use 10 winger risers. So, but I have 12 if I need to. So if I need to spread out the kids so that I can still walk in and through and all that kind of stuff, I have that ability. So again, I think that's one of those things where the philosophy is the same,
Right.
but the way we're all set up so differently that would change the tactic again.
Right. Yeah, so true. I mean, and this
Yeah.
is where it comes into everyone's going to be a little different, but everyone
Right.
can take the concept and kind of make it their own. How are
Hmm.
they gonna handle the situation that arose, right?
Right. Now, let's go back to the preservation of dignity
Mhm.
part of your
Yeah.
reason for including that, because I think, yeah, I definitely am thinking of it more from the structural perspective first, but I think you're right to point out that for the most part, when kids are, misbehaving or being off task or whatever, it doesn't come from a malicious place. It should be stated though that sometimes it does, and sometimes kids
Oh yeah.
need to be redirected in a different kind of way because it is very clear that they are making fun of another person,
Hmm.
intending to cause harm in some kind of
Yep.
a way.
Yep.
And we do have to make judgments as educators of like, I'm pretty confident that that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And of course we have to preserve safety, in the
Hmm.
room, emotional safety, etc. But when it is that in that category of like just normal teenager off-taskedness,
Run of the
where
mill kind of stuff. Yeah.
but that then I think that's where I fall very lockstep in that, and my tactic there is personally, and I want to know some of yours too, but
Sure.
mine is the same. I redirect those behaviors the same way I redirect wrong notes,
Hmm.
which is to say, for example, when kids sing me instead of Ray, I don't tell them it was wrong. I just say, "What did you sing there?"
Right.
and
Right.
make them
Right.
figure it out. Oh, that was me. What's it supposed to be? Oh, no, it's supposed to be Ray. Okay, then fix it.
Hmm.
And that's how I approach wrong notes. And that's the same way I approach behaviors. Hey, what are you doing right now? Oh, I'm
Right.
talking. What are you supposed to be doing? I'm supposed to be working on my solfege. Oh, okay, then fix that.
Right.
And
Right.
and
Right.
and that and that puts it back because I like it when they say out loud what the thing is that they did. That they did. That way I don't have to say it.
Right.
Everybody
Right.
knows. Everybody knows it's happening. And so you just say it. So thoughts about that first, and then what are some of your favorite tricks with that?
Yeah, so I'm a bit on the because it's funny because you would directly ask where that's not where I would first go if I can avoid it. And I will say
Hmm.
to your point, there are obviously violent actions, right? That is completely separate from this conversation. You always take care of those things in the manner that they deserve. But if we're talking just kids chatting or getting in the way of the group dynamic, right? I actually try as best to not do anything verbal at all, as much as I can. So I'll start, I'll just stare them down. It's kind of just the first thing. That was my first tactic. I'll be at the keyboard or directing, and I will just stare at this one kid for as long as I feel like I can. And usually they kind of they'll get with it, because then all the other kids will start to maybe see that the staring, right? And then maybe they'll stop talking or this and that. So that's what I first do. I kind of just lock into the kid, and usually that solves a lot of stuff. But if it doesn't, I'll then just leave my space. And I've taught my students that if we're singing something, it doesn't stop if I leave my podium area, right, behind the keyboard, or if I'm directing, right, I'm allowed to move freely, and the music will keep going, or the exercise will keep going, or etc. And they know that very early on. So that way, if my first thing where I, just kind of stare at the kid doesn't work, I will then just start making my way over. And a lot of times within you closing that gap, sometimes they'll get with it. And then other times I'll go up to a kid and just kind of, give them like a little like, I'll be like, hey, and then, they get with it or something like that. Or, I'll make a little funny face, like do the eyebrow thing, like I'm kind of trying to do now. Or I try to catch them as best as I can. Because I believe most behaviors I can stop in the moment. And then if I feel like I need to, later on, I'll catch up with them. And I think I wrote that in my article, which is, what is it? It was it's like critique in private, right? Where it's like praise in public, critique in private is kind of like the old thing where it's like, if something good, you reinforce the good, and if it can be held till later, I will address it later.
Yeah.
Very different. That's a different approach.
Yeah, it is. And I think also all these things, I'm thinking about all these different approaches, and in so many ways they come back to the structural differences.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had those types of conversations, because in my program it's a couple hundred singers in addition to the other classes we teach, like music appreciation and adaptive music, and so it's, in total we're dealing with like 260 kids. And so I have a team teaching situation, and we teach the classes together.
Okay.
And one of the things I've noticed, because I've been in a team teaching situation now for pretty much my whole career, with the exception of my first 2 years. And so one of the things that's interesting is that when somebody new comes, somebody new comes along and has been in a very different scenario of structure in terms of time with students, total numbers of students all at the same time, different classroom classroom setups, those types of things, is the expectations for what needs to happen are very, very different, simply because of those different perspectives. And that is a fascinating thing about what we do. And it's one of my interesting things on this show, creating all these professional development resources. They're born out of my experience, of course, but they are infinitely malleable depending on the various things. And I think that's true of articles like yours as well. Like there are certain things that, like you take the things and then you try to tweak them. And so I'm interested in moving to a very similar thing, but we touched on it a little bit earlier, but about how the rehearsal starts. And, in my environment, because I'm crammed for time, the walking into the classroom and the bell rings is the same moment in time as rehearsal starts. Now, other teachers might have like when the bell rings, I have a group social activity that we do, and that we're going to connect on a social way. And of course, I would still call that structured time. So that philosophically, I don't have an issue with that. But let's talk about the moment rehearsal, like an actual traditional, so to speak, choir rehearsal, where we're going to sing together, we're going to work on something together. When that starts, what are your thoughts on kind of the way that moment begins? Is it that, so like the music is just going to settle them down because we're just going to start singing, and suddenly when we're singing, they will get engaged? Or are you more of we're going to start when everybody's silent kind of a thing? Like we're going to all be focused on the same thing, and then we're going to go. How do you think about those moments?
I actually set them up even earlier. So there's the thing which I got from my first school. They called it do now work, which is a little bit, a little on the nose, but it works, right? So when they approach my room, I will have signage either outside the room or just as they approach the door. It'll have a sign about, something that they need to do that day, right? And it could be, like do now on board, or it could be, there's just like a little something, and it's just a blurb. It's just like a one quick hit. So as they come to the door, they instantly get, before they step into the classroom, something from me. And then they enter the classroom. I've already worked out all of my, procedures for what they do. But then I always have on the board, I kind of have like a PowerPoint every single day. It has the agenda, it has this, but I will have do now work for them. So before the bell even starts, they approach my room, they get a message from me, they look at the board, and they have an assignment where they start working on before the bell's even begun. And I kind of talk about that where it's like, and then I let them, you can lightly chat so long as you don't disturb other people. But I always make sure that they're in the room doing something. And most of the time it's solfege work, right? We're trying to let them have that time to get it done. But it could be anything. And so they're already in their own kind of zones, I guess. They're at their seats, they're working on their stuff, they're kind of lightly chatting, but they're all doing the thing that I kind of want them to do. And then depending on, how the activity goes or how challenging it is, I'll just get them started with a warm up, or, that's when I'll kind of ask how everyone's doing, or, do an announcement or whatever. But I start when I want to. And I think that was the point that I made in the article, which is, I make it so that they start when I'm ready. I don't wait for them. And even if they're not done with the do now work, which happens, a lot, I'll say like, hey, put it down. That time's done. You can finish it later, but we're doing the next thing. And I move everybody to the next thing on my terms and not theirs. I think that's kind of what you were expecting. Like, I don't wait for everyone to be done. And I'll ask, I do the finger thing, which is do you need 0, 1, 2, or 3 more minutes, right? And it's never 3, right? They can always pick 3, but it will never be 3. And that's a way for me to gauge, right? I can gauge the room, so I'm not pressuring them in any way. I'm still taking the temperature, but it's my choice at the end. I don't wait for that last kid to be done. Someone will most likely always get cut off as I'm moving everyone to the next thing, and they'll get cut up later. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is very similar to the philosophy again of how I would approach this. And I think the reason, and that's another one of those examples, though I think you touch on it also in the article, of there would be some possibly that would call that philosophy authoritarian, meaning, well, because you're ready, we have to go on. Who are you? You're just, why are you in, why is your opinion of when we need to start the most important one? And of course, I think that that's correct. Meaning you are the teacher, you are the one who is supposed to structure the time. In fact, they're paying you to do that. So,
right.
So that's a silly thing, but there are people that do, and there are other philosophies too, and I've encountered them with folks that talk to me or that I've spoken with about these types of things. Another one would be, for example, that the rehearsal is going to start, and everybody might be doing their own thing, and they might be having a conversation, or they might have been finishing bell work, or whatever it is, and the best way to get them going is to just start the music, and they will then learn to redirect themselves into the music. Now, the reason I don't like that approach, and I want to see what you think, is because I also think it teaches some unintended things, which is that we are not in this together. Like we are that this rehearsal can only start when everyone's ready. Like we are all ready, because if we don't, then it starts to send the impression that to kids, unspoken impressions that like, oh, I'll get there when I'm ready. But that is antithetical to, I think, what choral music is, which is that we are all one instrument. And the entire instrument has to be there functioning in order for us to function. Thoughts?
Yeah, I know. I absolutely get what you're saying. For whoever's out there thinking, is that, waiting for everyone or not waiting for everybody, you got to know your own program and your own kids and what kind of works. I've definitely done the start the music thing, and then they all are, scrambling to like go get the music right. I've done it. And I don't do it all the time. I know there are teachers out there that'll just play the next song, right? And just kind of get everything. And that's kind of their transition strategy. And like, okay, like you said, that's a philosophy thing. I would definitely be more in the camp of overwhelmingly, I like to have everybody together, right? I think I agree with what you're saying, which is, choral music, we are this is a group endeavor. It only works when we're all doing the same thing at the same time with the same focus and the same intent. So I would be with you, but I'm not gonna sit here and say I haven't done that as a transitional strategy kind of a thing. But I think if we start to build in from a young age the importance of us doing things together, Dr. Parsley at BU, he has his mantra is, when we do it, and everyone goes together, right? But it's exactly to your point. If it's a vowel thing, if we say everyone, we need to think about where your tongue is in this vowel, and 9 out of 10 people do it, we didn't do it together. So I get with what you're saying, and I would definitely be more in your camp of we should be teaching from early on that we do this all together, and that'll start to also help people quiet themselves down. Like we're thinking about chatty kids or, transitioning slowly, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah,
Right.
let's make sure we're all doing this together. And it's also going to change the mood, the feeling of the song and the intent of the song too. So yeah, I'm with
Oh
you.
yeah, absolutely. And the intensity with which everyone starts to listen
Yeah,
is dramatically different when the rehearsal starts from silence.
true.
It just like it gets them listening to a different level of detail, which I find to be intoxicating almost when you get a whole group of people doing that all at the same time. It's just
Oh yeah.
it's a great feeling, and teaching kids that is important. All right, well, I want to try to get to two more points in the
Yeah.
amount of time that we have left. One of them, which is also near and dear to my heart from the article, is the idea that sometimes I think teachers get wrong, which is that first I need to get them to buy into what we're doing. And like, there needs to be that like democratic buy-in, like where I've convinced them that it's worthwhile, and then we will start to become like rigorous and care about the product and the sight reading and the posture and the tone and all those things, because I
Right,
don't
right.
want them to just like parrot back my expectations without understanding. And I think that's a wrong-headed way to think of it, because buy-in, especially for teenagers, like when we're working with kids, we have to earn buy-in by teaching them to be good at stuff. And that
Yeah.
when they're good at stuff, the buy-in comes from the pride in their product. And
Yes.
then your classroom management issues start to take care of themselves, because when you say, "Hey guys, no, we have to do it a certain kind of way," then they already know, oh yeah, and it works too. Like when we do
Oh
it
yeah.
Mr. Lackey's way, or when we do it Mr. Muntz's way, or whatever, it works. And that we become good at it. And so then they start to self-monitor as groups.
Mhm.
The kids start to police those things. Is that kind of what you're talking about
Oh,
here?
absolutely. I mean, there's kind of two sides to that, or not two sides, two aspects, I would say. One is our job isn't to necessarily to convince them or get them on our side. Ours is to educate and to show them what possibilities are out there. So in terms of music, maybe something like Bach is not the most palatable style of music for the average high schooler. And, no one on the internet come after me, but let's just say like, it's maybe not the most approachable form of music, but undeniably us as musicians, the more that we do it, we just tend to eat it up. There's just something about it. So if you think about that, if you ask a kid if they want broccoli or candy, they're always going to take the candy, right? It's the same way. We don't need to get everyone on board about broccoli before we eat it. You do the thing. Show them the way, and they will be convinced because you are doing it with intent and you are doing it because it's what you believe in, and they're going to respect that and then fall in love with it. And then exactly what you said and what I said in the article, which is they're going to start to police themselves. Then they're going to start practicing even more outside of rehearsal. They're maybe going to get voice lessons. They're maybe join a community choir. And then my favorite part is when the kids then come back and start getting on me because I'm starting to not then keep the expectation. They almost surpass me in a way in terms of their excitement. And I think that's fantastic, right? They then hold me accountable. And then it's like, look at all of us together doing this whole thing. We're all totally on board. And that's the best feeling. It really is. And I've been really fortunate in many situations to have gotten to that point. But it does take a while. It really does. First couple of years of teaching can be really difficult. Not can be, I'll go even further. The first years are really tough. They are very tough because you're transitioning the philosophy and the culture of a choir. So if you're new out there, just stick with it, but believe in what you're doing. They will absolutely come to you. And you're going to see
Right.
the things that you and I have been really fortunate enough to have seen because we worked towards it with a group of people. So yeah.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, and it's um, it is educational philosophy that is out there, that
Yeah.
which is that what really should happen is that we should start the education from asking kids what they want to learn, and how they want to learn it. And the problem is that's fine if you've already learned it. Like if you've already learned music and how to do it and how to keep a steady beat and how to internalize pitch and how to make your voice be resonant and all those other things. If you've already learned it, then you're equipped to say, well, what I'd really like to do now is
Yeah.
fill in the blank. But if we've got a lot of us who teach in the trenches, so to speak, even though I use that term ironically, we are teaching kids the basic building blocks of music making. And they
Yeah.
oftentimes don't know enough yet
Hmm.
to direct that learning themselves, especially not in groups of 60.
No, no.
You know what I mean? And so I think this is where that philosophical part is so important. Is like, yeah, no, we are the experts, we're the guides, and we have to set
Yes.
up systems that are ready for them before they even walk in the door.
Hmm.
Which I really what I appreciated mostly about your article is that it really drives that home of like if these things aren't ready for kids before they get there, none of them really will work. And I think that's an important part. And so that actually leads us right to the last one I want to get you to talk a little bit about
Sure, sure.
is the warm up and the parts of your class period whenever they happen in a longer class period like yours where you are teaching things through what many of us just think of as mindless activities where you just sing 1 2 3 4 5 4 3 2 1 on different vowels and then and it's over and we move on to the next thing, but you describe those types of classes or parts of class as also a part of class to instill and build in classroom management concepts. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe this, in terms of my world, is the hill that I will die on. I am a warm-ups person, and I've met many people who are against. I've had teachers that say, I'd rather not because it wastes time. For me, if I am not warming up a choir before I rehearse them, I feel like I haven't done my job. Whether if it's a community group, whether it's kids, college even, if I haven't done the warm up process and I haven't done it well, it's a huge disservice because I believe wholly that that's where all the teaching happens. Warm ups is where I'm teaching all the skills. I'm setting up all these dominoes, so to speak. I think about my warm ups. I have a defined process. I talk about it a whole lot. Any chance I get, I talk about the process, and I do it with fidelity because I notice that the days in my rooms and my rehearsals, if I kind of skip around or skimp on my warm up, I have a harder rehearsal than any time I do really do the warm up with fidelity. I always have an easier time, and we always are more cohesive. We always sound better. And it really comes down to what you said, which is I think some people approach it just with the wrong mindset, which is they almost do like the buffet method. You'd kind of just go, okay, and you can see it in directors when they do it. They'll be like, okay, let's do this, let's do that, and you can see the wheels turning. Like I need, like my favorite one is when the directors warm me up and they say, let's do one more, and it's like, okay, there's not really necessarily a plan. So for me, I always think about how I'm lining up my students' voices. And in terms of education, we are most likely the only voice teacher that they're going to get. There are students that go and have one-on-one voice, but I would say, at least in my experience, a majority of my students do not have one-on-one voice teaching. And this actually goes all the way back to the beginning of our conversations about my influence from Dr. Jamie Rhodes, which is I'm teaching all these voices how to sing. I got all these kids right in front of me, all these adults in community setting, and I need to make them better singers. And they should be better because of the time that they've spent with me. And to me, that's the warm up. Then, when I've done all those things in the warm up that I need to do, and I've instilled the skills, I've prepped them for the music that's about to come, I'm just transferring. I'll say all the time, hey, remember the warm up that we did? That's this. And then kid always, oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah. Yep. And then they do it. And then it's almost like magic, but it's not. It's just because we've set it up. I've prepared them for it. I knew it was coming. We did the exercise. When the moment came, I told them to transfer those skills, and bada bing, bada boom, they do. I mean, it can be that simple, I think. I know I'm very much watering it down, but it takes a lot of time, and you have to build these things in. But that's why I think warm-ups are indispensable. If you do it right, and if you really have a process, you really think about it, you know what's going to happen, I think you're going to see incredible dividends in your rehearsals.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and again, I think this is a great way to wrap this up because A, it's the hill you'll die on, so that's a good way for you to punctuate your time on the show. But also because I agree again with the philosophy. I think my tactics are a little bit different, but the philosophy is the same.
Yes.
Which is just another interesting thing that I'm noticing. So again, with the shorter classes, you would probably look at my warm-ups if you came in and watched my class, and you would call them truncated or cut short. But at the same time, I've got a lot less time, and so what I do is I have to think about ways that there are vocal concepts, for example, that if I had more time, in fact, and I can look back and I can reflect on it because I used to have more time. Like
Sure.
I've seen my practice have to change. When I had those extra 10 minutes, I could spend 10 full minutes some days on just helping the boys access their kind of calling register and head voice, for example, using a lot of vocal affect or things I learned on my show from Ken Bozeman when he came on, because that blew my freaking mind. And all those things that he taught me to do, and I could spend like almost like a voice lesson time, and
Yeah.
I do that sometimes. But when your total minutes are cut 50 minutes per week, which is what
Yeah.
10 minutes per day is, then you start to have to make choices. And so then
Yeah.
instead of doing that during a warm up time, I would now look in the repertoire for moments when in one of the songs that we're learning that I could use that material to teach some of those same concepts vocally, because I'm trying to look for as many opportunities as I can to get the same bang for my buck, or more
Yeah.
bang for my buck, if that makes sense. So like I can
Yep.
teach the voice lesson, but while we're doing that, we're also learning the repertoire for the concert. And
Yeah.
I'm trying to cross reference those things. Whereas your description was, I'm going to teach all those concepts and then I'm going to transfer them into the repertoire, which I actually, honestly,
Yeah.
to be honest, I would rather do it the way you just. I
Yeah,
would
of course.
rather do it if I could. Like, so thoughts about that, and we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I guess I want to clarify. I recognize that people will hear that and say, "Wait, so you spend this much time?" It almost feels separate, right? Like there's the warm up is almost independent. That's not true. What you just said about, finding a place in the music, that's like an old school, tried and true. You look in the Honda Messiah, pick a whatever, and then you turn that into a warm up. I mean, that's classic. But for me, I'm not advocating for minutes, right? There are warm-ups that people will do that are extensive, but they're not planned out. It's just a collection of things. It doesn't matter if you have a 90 seconds or if you have 15 minutes to put into your warm-up. Think about exactly what you want to get out of that time. No matter how much time you have, just think about, in this amount of time, I want this thing to happen, and make it happen. That's it. That's
Absolutely.
all I'm advocating for. But it means that before you would step foot in front of the ensemble, you've taken the time to consider what's going to happen, what I'm about to do, and what that outcome is. Doesn't matter how much time you have. I'm just saying, don't pull off the buffet. Think about it, and then order off the menu.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's a great way to wrap it up, Kevin. I appreciate that. So thank you so much for spending an hour with me. This has been fun.
Thank you, Evan.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one at Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.